We had a vote on Twitter and to see, since the Voodoo 2 is now in the Pentium 2 build, what graphics card I was going to go with. And the choice was between two cards. First card is the ATI 3D Rage Pro AGP, slightly bit newer than what you'd expect to find in a Pentium 1 build, probably a bit more suited to the Pentium 2. And again, another slightly newer card, the Savage 4 Pro. This is a Sparkle model, and it's the model number SP398, 16 megabytes. So the S3 Savage 4 Pro 1. So that's the card we're going to be installing in the computer. So one of the things I don't actually like about this card is you notice on first generation AGP slots don't have the latch. They don't really have the latch, the little white latch that comes up and latches into the to a little hook here on the card. You may notice even on the ATI card we just have this kind of hole here that's kind of more designed for you to put a cable tie through, and I know some boards have like a post in the case. You can kind of just cable tie it down to. That's a bit janky as fixes go, but that's one thing I don't like about this card. But we'll pop it in. Put it in the slot now. Sorry if I shake the camera because it's attached to the bench. So get it in there. I'll include the drivers for this card in the description. And again, big thanks to Phil from Phil's Computer Lab, because he did a video on this card and he archived the drivers on his website. I think what Phil does is great as regards, conserving drivers and kind of keeping everything for posterity. He really does a good job and has saved me a lot of hassle recently when it comes to kind of these older computer builds, because his efforts of archiving and of kind of the information he's kept on these things is awesome. So that's the Savage 4 in. So we're going to try out some games that are more kind of appropriate for this vintage machine. So like Duke Nukem 3D, Quake, some of the other kind of build engine games using the Duke engine. May try out some slightly older games. I do want to try out the games from this Vicious Games pack, because these were sold along with the Savage card back in the day. I got the big box of this separate, but I remember even in the store, the guy actually ended up having to use the card, so he sold the game pack at a knockdown price. So I was able to pick those up back in the day. So yeah, let me get I might even bother putting the case on just yet till we test it out, get the drivers installed. One thing I did do is, if I slide this a bit more towards the camera, you can see down here there was the cage for the 80mm case fan. It was just way too noisy, because these are all passively cooled cards, and they don't run. The Savage 4 card won't run as hot as I think as the Voodoo card. I just got rid of this fan. It was just too noisy. This is a really bad idea, these cages here. I just think they're kind of silly. I'm glad they didn't stick around too long, because the vibrations go straight into the case and kind of dissipate across the case, so it's just too noisy. There was no way to kind of get the fan mounted there silently, so I just ditched the fan. It's not really needed. There should be enough airflow from the PSU up here and the actual fan for the processor. Everything else should be fine. We've got, it is a BabyAT case, but we should be okay. So cool. Let's fire it up. I'll load on the drivers and test out some games. So something worth mentioning, guys. I've been using USB thumb drives to transfer my files to Windows 98 machines. So as many may know, it doesn't have a mass storage device driver by default. So I've been using this disk. Let's see if the autofocus can keep up with me here. But it's from an early USB portable hard drive I used to have. I don't have the hard drive anymore, but I do have the installation disk. And it's from Canyon. Many may know them. They make a lot of floppy drives back in the day and stuff like that, and peripherals. So I'll image this disk and I'll put it up on my Google Drive and create a link to it so you guys can download it. It's a very cool disk. The drivers seem to work great. You do have to manually install stuff, but once you install the toolkit, you should be able to use the drivers from this disk with any mass storage device. I don't think you're limited by capacity either. So I've extracted the drivers to the desktop here, as you can see in this folder. So the thing is with these drivers, you've got to manually install for the S3 Savage 4 Pro. And Phil has covered this on his channel, but basically you want to go into right click on My Computer Properties, Device Manager, and display adapters. Now yours will have some generic name, but because I've already installed the drivers, I needed to install them so I could capture. So you want to right click on the adapter and go to Properties, Driver, Update Driver, and then navigate to the folder where your drivers are. Mine are on the desktop, so I'm just going to browse to there. And it's simple enough. You just want to click Next and Restart, and your driver should be installed. So if we go into Properties, Settings, and we have our resolution and color depth set there. If we go to Advanced, you should see that we have the S3 options here. Now they're fairly basic drivers, rather limited, not too many settings you can kind of change, but that's okay. So that should be your driver setup. So one of the cool things about the S3 Savage 4 Pro is that Resident Evil 2 here is optimized to run on it. Now, Resident Evil 2 on PC is a notoriously hard game to get running, even on some period hardware. But one of the cool things, as I said, is Savage is suitable for it. So if we go into the settings, we have, I'll just hit detect. Okay, so cancel that. So we have the Savage selected. We're at 640 by 480 in full screen. We go to features, so shading on, mesh pattern as alpha blending. So yeah, we're going to leave the alpha blending on. Bilinear and trilinear on. Palette change. This is the interesting one. We want to set that to on. Sound quality we're not really worried about. Special effects should be standard. Number of enemies standard. And perspective correction on. So okay. So once we jump into the game, you'll see kind of I'll point out some of the changes that we get from running this on the S3 Savage 4 Pro. So I'll be featuring this video in a comparison between the console versions and the PC version. Now it runs at a slightly slower frame rate because it's on limited by kind of the front side bus, but you can see that the color palette here, especially the kind of gamma, is a lot closer to the color space, is a lot closer to the console versions. Sometimes the console versions can look a bit washed out, so we're going to go in here to Kendo. So okay, I'm going to get these bullets first. And I'm going to go over here, grab these, and on the way back I'll trigger Kendo's death. So there we go. If you look at the blood, pay particular close attention to the blood effects. Those kind of pseudo particle systems. So yeah, the S3 Savage 4 Pro has a slightly enhanced kind of color space. What would be in later shaders and textures known as an emissive channel. So we're getting those emissive effects here. Even though the color space is a lot more accurate to the game, it's kind of just one of the features you get with this card, the way it handles those effects. So it really is up to yourself, but kind of whether you like that effect. You may notice that it's also in the fire and other kind of pseudo particle effects. It really is, you know, subjective whether you like that or not. But it does mean that the color space more closely matches what the developers had in mind than it would on other cards. So this is a good example of what I mean by the color space. I'll compare it here to the PlayStation and Dreamcast version of the game. That kind of establishing shot here as well. This is a good one because we can see a lot of dithering going on the wall and in darker areas. Here you can see in the side-by-side comparisons that the S3 Savage 4 Pro probably has the least amount of dithering and probably better image compression. But I know NVIDIA often use the phrase, you know, NVIDIA the way it was meant to be played, but when it comes to Resident Evil, it's definitely the Savage 4 Pro is the way it's meant to be played. It's kind of gimmicky. Similar in the way that some of the texture compression tricks that were used with Unreal are kind of gimmicky. Some of the stuff going on here with shaders are kind of gimmicky too, but I'm pretty Resident Evil 2 mad, so it's kind of cool to have it set up like this.
Sorry, but it looks like
some of the other games on the Vicious pack, such as Carmageddon 2 and Unreal, won't run as good as Resident Evil 2 because of the limitations in the front side bus on this Maiboard, but I can always play those on my Pentium 2 setup. So here we have some Quake, Chunky Quake. So we're using Chunky Quake because this card doesn't support the Glide API since it's not a Voodoo card. But again, the color palette is pretty accurate. And I kind of like the more saturated, darker colors. Direct 3D Quake. Now this is kind of a Quake port. Again, that uses Direct 3D, but as you can see with the kind of stutteriness and jumping, anywhere where there's kind of lights flickering or stuff going on, the frame rate really tanks. But it runs. We have some texture filtering in that. but to be honest, I prefer kind of chunky Quake on this card. We don't have any of the texture filtering, but I think the color space is pretty cool. And Duke Nukem runs as expected, even if I'm not doing a great job of it, playing on the keyboard without the mouse. So here we have Thief running, a game that's probably more suited to the Pentium 2 build or later machine. It runs, I would consider it playable. It's probably not the best setup to play this game on.
I live again. Son of a bitch must pay.
Just a few kind of housekeeping matters. Just for any wondering when it came to creating the media cable that connects the CD-ROM to the Sound Blaster card, how I approached the pin 1 alignment. Well, basically, as long as the contacts here are visible on both sides, you've got the polarity right. So that was kind of the way I approached that. Now, because we've a new BIOS chip in there, and the BIOS chip was burnt in May this month, it's defaulted back to that date. It comes up with the error of the time being inaccurate. Warning. That's down to me using the wrong kind of diode. I'm using a signal diode down there. I'll put the correct part number up in the corner somewhere for you to see. But yeah, it was the closest diode I had at hand to use, and the board works. It's just it's got the wrong characteristics as diodes go. It's the wrong type of diode in there. It's a signal diode. So that was our look at the S3 Savage 4 Pro in the Pentium 1266 MHz machine. I had hoped to get like a few more games running, but for some reason some of the lower res games I couldn't capture them using my Elgato HD 60S. It just wasn't happy with the signal, so it's not a bad card. All in all, I'd probably be happier with a Voodoo 2 or even a Voodoo 1 in there, but it's kind of nice to have checked it out on Resident Evil 2 and a few other games, but would I recommend it? Probably not. But if you're stuck, it's not a bad card. I may in the future try the Rage Pro in there and see how that goes. The 3D Rage Pro, and compare them. But yeah, I'm going to leave it in there. I'm happy with enough with it. It seems fairly compatible with all the games I have here. In the future, I'd like to show kind of games from the Doom engine, other games like Terminator, Future Shock, maybe one of the early Elder Scrolls games and things like that, but until I sort out my VGA woes, that won't be possible. Unless, again, I film it using just a camera pointed at a screen. Well, cool guys, thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat to you all again.